East Coast polls have been, take this wide shot. Will you see how we are bursting? There is about to be some sort of break in protocol because we are bursting.
You know, the nuns in my elementary school had the wisdom to be very careful about who I was allowed to sit beside.
Yeah. You enjoy our bad influence.
We're about to be separated.
We've completely devolved all professional
it's gone.
Visage.
I don't think we can get it back either.
No.
Because of these two.
We're the bad kids in class. I have to admit it.
There is a lot to say, and some of which can be said on television, it turns out.
Exactly.
But we work on television.
Oh, is that
so we're going to try to get it together, people.
Is that what happens?
People?
Yeah.
Get the nuns in.
Okay.
All right. It is 10 o'clock on the East Coast. The polls have been closed in the great state of Georgia for 3 hours. The Georgia U.S. Senate race is too close to call. NBC's Decision Desk characterizes this race as one in which Democratic incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock is in the lead. But you can see how tight it is. 88% of the vote is in statewide. That number has ticked up significantly since we just went to that quick commercial break. Steve, what came in while we were away?
We just got a big batch of same-day votes, election day votes from Gwinnett County. This is, again, one of the biggest in the state. There's almost 1 million people here, one of the fastest-growing counties in the state, and it's become a core Democratic county. And I think what's significant about what we just got in out of Gwinnett County is that Warnock led the last batch of election day votes that just came in by a fairly significant margin over Walker. So with 90% in, you see that Warnock finished in this county with 58.9. He's running at 62.4. The opportunity, well, again, for Walker tonight in a place like Gwinnett County, it was make sure Warnock doesn't get any higher than he did in November and try to roll his number back a little bit. And instead, you can see Walker's down a point here right now. Warnock is up 3.5 points relative to November. And again, I think significantly in that last batch of election day votes that just came in Gwinnett County, they favored Warnock over Walker. So Warnock still winning the vote overall. He didn't get 62%. But a significant margin. We also just got more election day vote from Cobb County. And again, here now we're up to 85% of the vote in. Now, Walker has been leading in the election day vote in Cobb County by about an 8-point margin. So as a result, if you've been following, the last time we looked at Cobb, Warnock was sitting at about 62%. His number's now fallen under 60, but he finished at 56.8. back in November. So again, with 85% of the vote in, Warnock right now is running 3 points better in Cobb than he did in November. Walker is still trying to get to his November number. Again, he is leading that election day vote, so I would expect with the remaining vote here, Walker to tick up a bit, Warnock to come down a tad, but Warnock on pace here, I think, in Cobb County to get exactly what he was looking to get out of it tonight. Take a look at Douglas County. We got all the vote in Douglas County. Again, Atlanta metro area, how did it look in November? Warnock 64.8. How does it look tonight? Warnock, basically 2 points better than he did in November. How about Walker? He improved by 1/10 of a point. This is exactly what Democrats want to see in this Atlanta metro area. They're doing very well with that same-day vote in Gwinnett. They're on pace in Cobb. They exceeded their number in Douglas. We showed you Rockdale earlier. Again, all of the things, all of those counties I just mentioned, Walker had a goal tonight. He has not met that goal in any of those counties. A couple others we can show you. Look right south of Atlanta, Fayette County. Oh, how about this one? Walker, all the vote is in. Walker wins this tonight by 491 votes.
Wow.
This county, in the 2004, we talk about the Atlanta metro area, outside of Clayton and Fulton and DeKalb, which have been Democratic counties for a long time, the rest of these counties that are blue right now used to be red counties. This county stays red tonight by 491 votes. In 2004, it voted for George W. Bush by 43 points. So that's the kind of transformation you've seen in this Atlanta metro area. And I think critically for Democrats tonight, this is an improvement again from November. Warnock bumps up by 2.3 points. Walker by only 0.2 of a point. So the Democrats improve. They nearly pick off Fayette County tonight. They nearly take another one of these Atlanta Met. They've been picking one or two off every election, it seems, the last couple decades. They almost add Fayette tonight. They come within 491 votes. But again, not at all what Walker wanted to see out of that county tonight. All the vote is in Paulding County. We were showing you this one earlier. Walker moves up by 8 0.8 of a point. Warnock moves up by more than that. Again, there was more improvement here for Warnock than for Walker. This is a core Republican county. We talked about Walker needing to move up 4 or 5 points in places like this. All of the vote is in right now. I should say all the vote is now in Walton County. Take a look at this one, another core Republican county. Walker's up a little, Warnock's up a little. It's a wash. I mean, the story, we're still waiting on some votes here, but the story is just consistently the same. The biggest Republican counties in the state, the biggest Republican vote-producing counties in the state, are the places generally where Walker lagged behind Brian Kemp, the Republican governor, the most in November. And he just has not moved the number up the way he needed to in basically any of those counties. He's still not getting anywhere near the level Kemp got. He didn't need to get to the Kemp level. He needed to get closer. And meanwhile, again, the Democrats in those counties that were already strong for them, they've actually gotten stronger so far tonight. And that last batch of same day of election day vote we just saw out of Gwinnett County was good news for Democrats, too, because Warnock's on pace to continue adding votes. You see, since we came on, the lead comes down statewide for Warnock. That's because that Cobb election day vote that I was telling you about that favors Walker got added in. So it makes it closer statewide. But again, still sitting here waiting on a lot of same-day vote out of DeKalb, still sitting here waiting on a ton out of Fulton, and I believe we just got, now here we go, we just got basically the rest of the vote from Cherokee County, the one we have been talking up all night as a critical barometer, the #1 Republican vote-producing county in the state of Georgia. Herschel Walker's going to finish at 69.1% there, it looks like. Again, that's an improvement for him from the November general election. From the 67.6 he got in November to the 69.1 tonight, he moved up 1.5 points in Cherokee County. But Walker moved up from 29.2 to 30.9. Warnock, moved up from 29.2 to 30.9. He improves by 1.7 points. So this actually, Walker got a bigger number than he got in November, but his margin is actually less tonight than it was in November. And again, this is a county, look at how Brian Kemp did in the governor's race. He won it by 50 points. And tonight, Walker's going to come out of here not even with a 40-point victory out of this state. So 38.2%. That's the margin for Walker. It was almost 50 for Brian Kemp. So not at all what Herschel Walker needed out of this county tonight. And again, that probably leaves Forsyth County as the second biggest Republican county where we have significant outstanding vote. But I'll show you, but the story's no different. You know, again, Warnock's moved up more since November than Walker. These are just all places where Walker needed to have significant gains. And when I say significant, I say 4 or 5 points, better than he did in November. And we're just not seeing him do it anywhere. And we're seeing Democrats get the numbers they wanted to out of the Atlanta metro area. And I think what we're just sort of waiting on right now to see is some more of that same-day vote. I think particularly we've not seen any of the same-day batches come in from DeKalb. I think everybody in the world expects the same-day, the election-day vote in DeKalb to break heavily for Warnock in a way that I think would make this math look even more promising for him. But we haven't seen a report from DeKalb yet, so I think there may be some waiting on that. And again, maybe a little bit more from Fulton. But the numbers from Fulton, the numbers we just saw from Gwinnett County, those are numbers Democrats want to be seeing.
65 and 70% in from DeKalb and Fulton is promising at this point for Democrats, for sure. Steve, thank you. Interrupt us as more stuff comes in that's going to change our understanding of these dynamics. Let's go back now to Greg Bluestein. He's politics reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He's been live for us tonight at the Warnock campaign headquarters. Greg, it has been a seesaw here as we've seen this lead flip back and forth. We did just get about 15 or 20 minutes of consistent reports from Steve Kornacki, basically describing all of the results is sort of pointing in a Warnock-friendly direction, so it certainly feels right now that NBC characterizing Warnock as being in the lead, and those latest results feel positive for Warnock. How does it feel there at HQ?
Well, look, it's a full-on party mode right here at HQ. There's a dance scene behind me. And look, Steve's been spot on all night, not surprisingly, about this seesaw. It looked like Democrats would have an early lead. It looked like Republicans would cut into their margins. And it looked like Democrats would retain that lead right now. There's still tens of thousands of votes in Metro Atlanta to be counted. And that's why I'm getting texts from Republicans right now saying, stick a fork in it, this thing is over.
Republicans are telling you that.
Republicans are telling that senior Republicans are saying it's all over, but the counting, it's over. I'm hearing reports from strategists allied with Herschel Walker's campaign saying, that there's very little path to victory right now for him. You still have to wait till those metro Atlanta counties come in, but it's not looking good for Herschel Walker right now at all.
Greg, we don't want to get ahead of the actual results, as I mentioned, and I will reiterate, NBC characterizes this race right now as too close to call with Reverend Warnock, Senator Reverend Warnock in the lead, but that's as far as we can go in terms of projecting any sort of result here. Given that, though, and given what you're just describing, I wanted to just ask you substantively, one of the things that we saw, particularly after the general election, for this runoff in particular, was Senator Warnock's campaign appealing openly to Republicans and appealing openly to swing voters and people who don't ally themselves traditionally with the Democratic Party and Democratic candidates. Is it possible for us to tell from your reporting, from what you're seeing in the results, from what the campaigns are seeing, whether or not that part of the strategy from Warnock might have been the difference maker here?
Yeah, it's a unique strategy because usually runoffs, we see it as a turnout operation. We see candidates go for the base. But in this case, Senator Warnock had the resources and the message to go after not just the liberal base, but also those split-ticket swing voters, moderates, independents, who in big numbers did not back Herschel Walker. And we've talked about this, but Governor Kemp had 200,000 more votes than Herschel Walker in the November midterm. And this was an area where Democrats thought they could continue to appeal to those voters and get them back to the polls, even without other races on the ballot.
Right. So even in counties where they're not going to end up winning, the Democratic candidate is not going to end up winning, shaving down those margins, keeping those margins low, even in places where the Republican won. We're seeing the effect of that tonight in these totals. Greg Bluestein, politics reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, MSNBC political contributor. We'll be back with you, Greg. Thank you. I appreciate it.
It's striking that Von Hilliard's sources aligned with Herschel Walker and Greg Blustein's sources in the Republican Party are so forthright. And that speaks to the lack of support that Herschel Walker had among Republicans.
What do you mean?
Because you're less truthy when you're all in. But when the guy is Trump's, handpicked guy who doesn't even live in the state, the Republican operatives who can read a poll and know where every last Republican vote in the state is, and they know they are not in the counties that are outstanding, they'll tell reporters like Von Hilliard and Greg Bluestein the truth. Yeah. So I think you can take their reporting, not just because of the caliber of journalists that they are, but because of the quality of the sources that are going to tell the truth about Herschel Walker's past.
Democrats have been consistent all night. The text vibe has been this way all night. Democrats have been confident all night. And because the thing is, what Democrats and what you understand as having worked in campaigns is Democrats vote early and they report late. And so if you're getting toward the end of the night and what's left are places like DeKalb County and Fulton County, Democrats feel really good if it looks like a tie because they're like, oh, those late voters are us. Because Democrats, the way that voter suppression has worked is it's pushed Democrats to really early vote, to really lean into souls to the polls and vote early, to lean into absentee, which was really destroyed by this law. Absentee was crushed by it. And then to also show up on Election Day. I talked to a lot of voters in Atlanta who said, they were deliberately waiting to vote on Election Day. That was their goal, was to vote on Election Day. So Democrats get all three bites at the apple. Republicans only get the one.
That's what happens when you tell people to just vote.
That's correct.
And don't say that early voting is somehow
bad. That early voting also
corrupted.
Democrats get all three.
You know what? The other thing that Vaughn was talking about that I think bears discussing is the fact that, Walker's strategy at the beginning of this race was not to go after, Warnock's strategy was not to go after Walker and his myriad scandals. Yeah. It was to talk about the work that he had done, focusing on state level issues, and also to invoke his bipartisan record, specifically mentioning Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio on the campaign trail. With Ted Cruz, Warnock worked on a bipartisan infrastructure effort in terms of highways. With Marco Rubio, he worked on maternal health policy. Mm-hmm. These were people whose names, prominent Republicans, whose names he was invoking in a bid to do exactly what he ended up doing, which is eat in to Walker's share of moderate Georgia voters who find him unpalatable, and But
he closed this campaign with a very direct attack challenge to Herschel Walker and everything Herschel Walker has represented as a candidate. There's room for one more note about the colossal stupidity of the Trump just vote on Election Day strategy. And that is that he's choosing it in a state that one of its earlier choices for voter suppression was to close the polls at 7 p.m., to leave them open only for 12 hours, 7 to 7. The state we're sitting in here right now, 15 hours. New York State, that opens at 6 a.m., closes at 9 p.m. So if you're Donald Trump and you say, I only want you to vote on Election Day, the next thing you say to your Republican legislatures is, oh, by the way, put 3 more hours on Election Day.
Or make it open 24 hours on Election Day.
Give me 3 more hours at least on Election Day. But, he's just played into this thing so flawlessly, stupidly all the way on the vote only on election.
Here's my totally dumb question about this point, which I think you've all made admirably tonight. So the reason that Trump has demonized absentee voting and early voting is because he needs to do so in order to feed the backward-looking myth of why he lost in 2020. Now, the 2020 election will never be fought again. Nothing will ever happen there that will ever vindicate that strategy. We're not going to terminate the Constitution and reinstate him without it. It's just not going to happen. And so is there any way that the Republican Party can take that and turn it into something that might be electorally constructive for them? I mean, it has no value even in Trump's world, except in this backward-looking, myth-making thing that only works if he gets to be a dictator because we get rid of the Constitution. I mean, it really doesn't function in any way. How can they take this and make it function for them in the future?
Well, Ronna McDaniel, Ronna is trying tonight. She's out there tweeting her little heart out, bless her soul. Go vote. Everybody's I mean, they're trying, but it's too late. The toothpaste is out of the tube. And the reason he had to malign, and Republicans built absentee voting.
That's right.
I mean, that was their strategy. The Democrats now do it much better than they ever did. But part of that is because Trump tainted it so completely. And you're right. He will never stop tainting it. Even if everyone goes to him and says, we can't win without absentee voting. He doesn't care.
All that matters is that I'm not seen as a loser from 2020, and therefore this myth is more important to me than the party.
He will spend the rest of his life trying to disqualify the absentee ballots from 2020 because in his delusional imagination, that's how he lost.
And by the way, Romney McDaniel,
right,
whose uncle got 53% of the vote in Georgia. This is a state that has not overwhelmingly elected Republicans. Barack Obama got 47% in 2008. Then he got 45% against Mitt Romney, who was a sort of norm core type Republican. And then it started to get real tight. And by the time it got to Joe Biden, it was 49.5 to 49.2. The state has been slipping slowly away. And so the dumbest thing you can do is to foreclose any opportunity for people who still remain Republicans to vote. But they've made a conscious choice, not just here, but all over the country.
They poisoned the well.
They poisoned their best type of voting.
That said, it's still a tie. It is still too close to call. NBC characterizes this race as Raphael Warnock being in the lead. I was about to go to a break, but I'm going to Steve. I don't know why. Steve, they've told me to go to you.
Well, I just wanted to give you, we got a big update of 45,000 votes that came out of Fulton County. We also got the rest of Clayton County, which, at least in terms of the percentage, is the best Democratic county in the state. So you see Warnock finishing with 89% in Clayton County, and then a big update of 45,000 votes in Fulton County, now really getting into those same day, those election day votes. Now, as you can see, they're Democratic ballots, but they're not as Democratic as the early vote. So you're looking at, again, Warnock's number comes down a little bit, but he's still sitting at 79% essentially. He had finished at 73.5% on election day. So, and you look at what's left here, you would expect this number to come down some, but not to the level that Walker needs it to come down to. Walker needs it to come down to 73.5% or less. And now we have 83% in here. We have the vast majority of the vote in Fulton County, and that election day vote is exactly what Democrats are hoping that it looks like. So you could see just before that came in, just before that in Clayton had come in, Walker had been leading in the statewide tally. He'd been leading because the other major Republican vote-producing county, Forsyth County. You got Cherokee and Forsyth right next to each other. They are number 1 and number 2 in terms of producing Republican votes. We basically got all the vote in Cherokee County, and we've got almost all the vote now in Forsyth County. And you could see here, again, Walker winning it, but it was Warnock who actually improved more than Walker did from November. So this is, on paper, Walker wins the county, but this is a loss for him because he needed to do much better than this in Forsyth County. So this was the last biggest place left. I think Coweta County, there's one other somewhat significant sized Republican county that has a big number of votes left, but otherwise it's just DeKalb County, same day vote in DeKalb County. And then now we've got a big piece of the puzzle just filled in there with Fulton County. We've got Clayton County all the way in. And what that adds up to is now a lead of Walker for 14,000 votes, more than that statewide. And if you're looking at this from a Republican standpoint, and where are there votes that could overcome just that 14,000? That gets tough to see, let alone with what's still to come in DeKalb, Fulton County.
Can we go back to Clayton County for a second, Steve?
Yep.
Can you put Clayton County up there and then show us that vote total versus what we saw in the previous election?
Yeah, so this is, it's improvement here for Warnock and a slight drop for Walker. This is one of the biggest. This is the county, as a matter of fact. It was about 4 a.m. on the Friday after the election in 2020. This county came in with an update that actually put Joe Biden ahead in Georgia for the first time, and he didn't lose that lead after that.
So just to summarize, and I may get this wrong, but I'm just taking notes while you're talking. And sorry, you go.
We just got a big update. This is a big batch from DeKalb County that just came in, as you can see. So now we're up to about 3/4 of the vote in DeKalb. And wow, okay, now we've got just about all the vote in from, that's it. Gwinnett County, nearly 1 million people live here. Warnock has improved by more than 3 points from November. What does this look like statewide? Well, I'll let you take it from there because I think there's some news there.
That check mark is a consequential thing. NBC News can now project that the winner of the Georgia U.S. Senate election tonight is incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock. You saw the math happen effectively live on your screen there. We see a difference here of just 26,000 votes between these two gentlemen, with 94% of the vote in. We had previously characterized Senator Warnock as being in the lead. NBC News, again, now projects that the winner of this U.S. Senate race is the incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock. Now, we saw, as these results came in around the state, we saw Mr. Walker do marginally better, particularly in small, rural, lightly populated, heavily Republican counties. That was not enough to make up for the improvement in standing that we saw from Senator Warnock in heavily Democratic areas. In larger, more populated Republican-leaning counties, Senator Warnock, we saw him cut into the kind of lead that Mr. Walker might otherwise have had. But the final result is now no. The U.S. Senate seat in Georgia will be held by Raphael Warnock. Voters in Georgia, for the 4th time in 2 years, choose Raphael Warnock as their senator for this seat. When Republican Senator Johnny Isakson retired, Senator Warnock ran for his seat, made it to the runoff, ran in the runoff, got the seat. That earned him 2 years. Then he decided to run for re-election, got to the runoff. Tonight is the runoff, and he is re-elected to the United States Senate. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this is the first African-American man ever elected to a full term in the United States Senate from the great state of Georgia. Major moment.
Yeah. Wow.
That happened.
And it shouldn't have had to happen. I think it is. We should note that it shouldn't have had to happen. I mean, the fact that he's had to run, 5 times in 2 years?
1 million times.
1 million times in 2 years is a result of Jim Crow. It was a decision that was made in 1964. The guy's name is Denmark Groover. I went in a deep wormhole on him today, who was a United States senator from Georgia, who decided that they needed to have these runoff elections in order to prevent black voters from being able to decide elections. And they saw their block voting as inherently voter fraud, and therefore they needed to give a second shot. So, the reality is Raphael Warnock already won this seat. The fact that he had to win it twice is a result of Georgia still retaining some aspects of Jim Crow, which they doubled down on with this new voter law that produced long lines. It didn't have to happen. a shortened period in order to do this. Instead of 9 weeks, they only had 4 weeks. They cut off the last weekend. Voting ended on Friday of last week. They didn't get that second weekend. They killed souls to the polls right before the election. Republicans in the state of Georgia have done everything. And Brian Kemp, you know, he may look good because of what he did with Donald Trump and resisting him, but Brian Kemp is one of the authors of the modern day Jim Crow residue that has created, because Republicans want to guarantee themselves these statewide elections. In this case, they were defied by a very multiracial coalition of voters who said no.
Signed that law behind closed doors in front of a picture of a plantation.
And
if you needed any more visuals.
Correct.
This is a resounding victory for people of color, for Black Georgians, for a changing country, for one of the most... I spent some time with Reverend Warnock on the trail the last time he ran. A phenomenally disciplined candidate. I was with him the day the Raffensperger phone call leaked. And that's the time you could really just go after Donald Trump. Raphael Warnock did not choose to do that. He chose to talk about health care. He chose to talk about education. He is someone that has relentlessly focused on issues ranging from student loan debt to climate change, maternal mortality, really important issues in his tenure in the Senate, which of course has only been 2 years long.
We have a live shot here of Raphael Warnock's headquarters in Georgia, where, as they say, crowd goes wild. People reacting to the news that their candidate has been reelected to the U.S. Senate. You can just feel the energy through the screen.
The phones.
Right now, and everybody holding up their phones to capture the moment. You know, if somebody else next to you has their phone out, you probably don't need yours out. You can just get it from them later. I'm just saying, you could watch the event instead of just watching it through your screen. But that's cool. That's cool. I mean, for the Democrats, this has a practical impact. Having 51 senators is better than having 50 senators, particularly when some of your senators are named Sinema and Manchin, and you are trying to get stuff done. This says a lot about what is going to happen in 2024, because this says a lot about what Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are going to be able to do in terms of policy. Joe Biden's going to be able to sign some laws. He's going to be able to sign some bills. They're going to be able to do stuff with legislation that they otherwise would not have been able to do with senators like those in the driver's seat and enjoying the spotlight as much as we saw.
Judges.
And confirm judges. That's what I was about to say. I mean, you've got now as a key voting issue, this is another seismic shift. When you look at those counties that are seismic shifts between 04 and now, the issue of the Supreme Court as a political deadweight for Republicans is a seismic shift. And Joe Biden will be able to run on the federal judges he confirms in the next 2 years.
And he's going to be able to confirm them much faster now, because he's been working with the Judiciary Committee, which is composed of equal number of both parties. Now the Judiciary Committee is going to have a majority of one on the Democratic side. That means procedurally they will get those confirmations out much faster. They'll get to the floor faster. They'll get through the floor faster. Legislation is going to be a much bigger challenge because there's always the Republican House of Representatives. But what they can pass in the Senate has changed dramatically.
And should we? No, I mean, this is effectively the end of Mitch McConnell's obstructive career. He's just, you know, he was reelected a couple of years ago. I don't know how much longer he stays in the United States Senate, but effectively what he's been able to do to Joe Biden, what he did to President Obama, that ends now, at least for the next couple of years. He won't be able to do that anymore.
I want to tell you that we're going to try to do something that's going to fail here in just a moment. I'm going to try to go to Jason Johnson at Warnock headquarters, and I'm telling you that's going to fail, not because of any technical failure, but because there's no chance he's going to be able to hear me. So, Jason, just talk for a second. Just tell us, talk, say things. Go.
I think I can hear you.
Tell us about the room.
Couldn't hear for a second there. It's amazing. So the music is popping. All I do is win. Everybody on Warnock team is extremely excited. I got to tell you guys, the feeling here isn't just elation. The people here actually feel like they saved the country. And one of the insiders I was talking to said, look, Raphael Warnock now has a 6-year term in the Senate. They think Georgia will be solidly blue by the time he has to run again. They think Georgia is the next Virginia. So this isn't just a victory today, it's a victory for the next 6 years.
Wow. Jason, can you talk to us about the moment people realized that he won and the reaction in the room?
Yes, it was ridiculous. It was amazing. I got to tell you, I was there when Obama got elected. I literally had an older woman come up to me and say, I wasn't this excited, or I haven't been this excited since 2008. I have never seen this level of enjoyment. And like I said, Rachel, all throughout the night, I was surprised at how optimistic the Democrats were. but I feel like everybody in this room feels like they accomplished something. And I got to tell you, by comparison, when I was going throughout the community today, even when I talked to Republicans, many of them said they didn't want to vote for Herschel Walker, but every Democrat said they were thrilled to vote for Raphael Warnock a second, third, or fourth time if necessary to get him back in the Senate.
Jason Johnson, thank you so much. It's great to have you there. Great to have you having those conversations. I know you can't hear me, so I'll just say bye-bye. We're going to check. We'll try to get back to Greg Bluestein, who's in a different part of the room as well, see if we can get back to them while they're doing that. Also, we should check in with Von Hilliard at the Walker campaign headquarters if we can. They obviously are receiving the same information, presumably with a much different mood. Von Hilliard at Herschel Walker headquarters in Georgia. Von.
We should note on the television screen here at Walker headquarters, they are playing Fox News, and they were a little delayed after us, but just in the last 2 minutes, Fox News has officially called it for Raphael Warnock. The room here was quiet, and they are now playing Journey's Don't Stop Believin', so make of that what you will. But this is a moment, a reality. I was just also talking with that Walker ally who I've been talking with, and the quote was, "I believe it's over." There is an acknowledgement that this was a campaign that was unable to make up that 38,000 vote deficit that 1 month ago they faced against Raphael Warnock here. They brought out the likes of Brian Kemp to try to help convince those libertarian voters, to try to convince those folks who either did not vote in the election at all or voted for the Democrat Raphael Warnock to change their votes. But what these results are showing us, that it wasn't enough. And if I may, after traveling around the country here through the course of 2022 to cover midterms from the likes of Arizona here to Georgia, you have seen yet again these Trump-backed candidates go down. While they won primaries here across the country from the likes of Kari Lake in Arizona, Tudor Dixon in Michigan, Tim Michels in Wisconsin, Herschel Walker here in Georgia, time and again we have seen over the course of the last month these candidates go down in the general elections. It was a question of, would, for a second time, so many of these independent voters, even conservative voters in these key states like Arizona and Georgia, be willing to vote for a Democrat yet again? And the American voter has clearly answered that tonight, is that yes, they are willing to vote not just one time for a Democrat, but they're willing to vote for a Democrat for a second or even a third time. And that is what was ultimately going to be handing Raphael Warnock yet a 6-year term here in the United States Senate.
Von, drawing that connective sort of tissue that you're describing between these different types of campaigns, these different types of candidates in different parts of the country, one of the things I therefore have to ask, because it is part of a pattern, is whether there's any question as to whether or not Mr. Walker will concede. He was asked explicitly on the campaign trail this week if he lost the race, whether he would concede the race, and he walked away from the people who were asking him that question without answering it. Do you have any expectation, do we have any reporting to indicate how he might himself personally handle this loss?
The direct answer to that is no, but there has been a questionable campaign apparatus here around Herschel Walker. We should note, there has been no even denial of a serious allegation that came out here in the last 5 days of a woman who came forward with her name and on the record alleging that Herschel Walker physically attacked her. There was no denial or no response ever given by the campaign. And if you just look at the amount of money that went towards Herschel Walker's candidacy, he was outspent by more than 2-to-1 margin by Warnock forces here. This is a question about Mitch McConnell, about Rick Scott, about the faith that was placed in this candidate who was initially endorsed by Donald Trump. I think that you have a Republican Party that is implicitly looking to move on from Donald Trump, but whether they will ever explicitly get to that point, that is the question. But in terms of Herschel Walker coming out and defending him, you saw very few Republican senators come out, the likes of Tim Scott, John Kennedy, Lindsey Graham. There was not a cavalry, though, of Republican figures that came out to this state. Not even Donald Trump was willing to come back out here and put his name on Herschel Walker. So the former Heisman Trophy winner may be a lone man walking. This is a man who didn't take up residency here in Georgia. until literally just about 14 months ago here. And so you're unlikely to see the likes of Georgian Republican figures. Brian Kemp wasn't even willing to campaign with him until after he handily won his November general election. So you should expect to see Herschel Walker, who was not involved in politics before this year, really to be left alone as Republicans look to try to posture towards not only 2024 Senate races, House races, but also try to come to terms with how they could even begin to win the White House, as Donald Trump is the only announced candidate on the Republican field right now.
Vaughn, one last question for you along those lines. Mr. Walker has lost tonight, but he got close. And at least with the numbers that we're looking at right now, with not every vote counted, but very close, he's within a point of Raphael Warnock. With a big investment in his campaign, with more strategic and financial support from Mitch McConnell, from Rick Scott, from the other sort of Republican powers that be, and these guys who control resources within the party, arguably he could have got there. Are there people close to the Walker campaign who are mad about that, who are angry that they didn't get the kind of support that might conceivably have put them in the winner's column tonight?
I asked Brian Kemp this question when I sat down with an interview with him last week on Thursday. I said, does it frustrate you? And he said that he doesn't believe that money matters in races like this. And in large part, the American public here is keenly aware of these candidates here. And I think that that general election from a month ago is a testament to that. The state of Georgia, which is historically a conservative state, Brian Kemp pushed back on the idea that this is a purple state, despite the last two election cycles. He beat Stacey Abrams by 8 percentage points. And that is calling into question, where the voting electorate, to how far are they willing to go here? And Herschel Walker tried to step away from Donald Trump in the last 5 weeks, but clearly there was a stain that came with the last year of his candidacy. In terms of the actual amount of money that was spent on these candidates and on these campaigns, I think you go to the likes of even Arizona, where I spent the good last several months here, and you compare it to the likes of the Mark Kelly, right, in the U.S. Senate race, in Raphael Warnock. They were to build around, and I think the Biden administration allowed him to do this idea of Capitol Hill successes, right? The likes of Mark Kelly was able to hold up the CHIPS Act is a deal that he helped, was instrumental in. Joe Biden was in Arizona today to join him. Raphael Warnock has talked about the millions of dollars that he was able to direct towards HBCUs. He was able to make the case here to, especially the Democratic voters here in the state of Georgia, that he helped press the Biden administration on student loan forgiveness. He was able to make the case here over the course of the last 2 years that having a Senate majority and having that extra Democrat up on Capitol Hill was consequential. It was more than just simply representation for the state of Georgia, but it had real world consequences. And that is what Republicans are also working up against, is the reality the Democrats can hold up the CHIPS Act. They can hold up the infrastructure package. They can hold up these significant achievements up on Capitol Hill to voters and make the case that Democrats are able to do something, unlike the Republican Party, which is still trying to figure out what its future looks like, with Donald Trump potentially looking to seek the helm of it again.
MSNBC's Vaughn Hilliard reporting live for us from Herschel Walker's campaign headquarters, where the crowd there has also just heard the news about Mr. Walker falling short tonight. Vaughn, thank you for your insight tonight. It's been great to have you with us. Much appreciated.
Thanks, guys.
Can I pick up on something that he just said?
Please.
I mean, one thing that we should all disavow ourselves of ever asking is, will the Republicans get in a room tomorrow and decide the Herschel Walker strategy is a bad idea? The Doug Mastriano strategy sucks. Carrie Lake was a freak. Voters. No! This is who they are. They will not do that. And Vaughn said about 1,000 really important things. The other one is that Republicans now have totally different forces of gravity. The Supreme Court now pulls them down. It doesn't lift them up. They got all 6 seats, and voters hate the court. The idea of governing, Republicans have always mocked Democrats for, I'm going to go out there with my plan. It now proves that voters are pretty into governing. Yeah. So all of the gravitational things that Republicans have counted on, the Supreme Court will help me, governing is boring, we can just go for the cultural issues. It's close, which means they won't change their strategies, but the political forces are pulling against everything that they've made a 20-year bet on?
Well, I mean, the thing is, Republicans made an affirmative choice because the demographics just are what they are. About 6 in 10 white Americans are Republicans. That's just the base. In the South, you know, racially polarized voting, it's much more lopsided than that. Any Republican starts off at about 50%, 49, 50% in any Southern state. That's just reality. And so Republicans have made a choice over the last generation that they are not going to do policy, that policy is boring, policy is wonky, it's nerdy, and that what they're going to do is focus on non-college educated white voters, demonize college education and collegiate education as being elite and effete and awful, and just focus on non-college educated white voters and focus on their emotions. Everything that Republicans put forward is about the emotions of non-college educated white voters and their fears, and making them more afraid of demographic change, more afraid of education, more afraid of people who live in cities, more afraid of the border and of immigrants, and just constantly stoking that. There is a short-term benefit to that, which you just saw tonight, right, which you can get enough rural voters and enough non-college educated white voters to come out and dutifully vote for whoever you put forward, no matter how flawed, no matter how many times they put a gun to the head of the woman they were married to. They don't care about that. They will come out dutifully. But the problem is, at some point, with a country that's becoming more racially diverse and more diverse in terms of religion, you're going to have to do what Michael Steele tried to do when he was chairman of the RNC. You've got to, at some point, try to appeal to non-white voters. You just have to, because the demographics are what they are. I ran into my cousin in Atlanta because he moved to Georgia from Queens. And a lot of people are moving around and moving south. And so these states like North Carolina and Georgia are just going to change more. So at some point, Republicans, yeah, it works for y'all for now. You're going to have to make a decision, and I'm sorry, but the black candidates you put up and the Muslim candidates can't be Dr. Oz. Yeah. At a certain point, people aren't going to go for that. You can't humiliate the people that you want to bring in. I'm sorry, but Herschel Walker was a humiliation to black people. The people I talked to in Atlanta and all over the country who have been all in my phone saying, please promise me that this man won't be a senator, because they felt absolutely kicked in the face and humiliated and had their noses rubbed in the dirt by the fact of his nomination. Yeah, because he was so inadequate, so bad, so... Well, what did Chappelle say? Demonstrably stupid? Yeah. That it made it look like you're mocking black people. That ain't a strategy.
The Atlantic today suggested that Herschel Walker's candidacy was an assault on black dignity.
It was.
And the reporting that we have out of Atlanta, I mean, I think the CNN polling from last week said that he was going to win 3% of the black vote. I mean, just a staggering rejection from the black community. And, you know, I will say, Joy, you'd think the Republican Party will have to ameliorate itself, but it increasingly feels like their strategy is, if we can't win, then let's change the rules.
We'll just suppress them.
Well, whether it's gerrymandering, whether it's the independent state legislature theory, whether it is voter suppression, change the game.
Yeah. The Georgia voter has shown over the last few elections who they will vote for. They will vote for Democrats, and they will vote for Republicans who do not align themselves with Trump. Republicans who say no to Trump. That is who they will vote for statewide. They will not vote for Trumpy Republicans statewide, and they will not vote. I mean, this is a message about where the Republican Party is. It does not mean that Georgia right now is an all blue state. There's plenty of Republicans in Georgia, including lots of people who cast votes for Herschel Walker tonight. But that idea that the Republican Party has made a strategic error in aligning itself with somebody who Republican voters in Georgia will not go with, that's a lesson that it sort of doesn't matter whether or not they learn. The voters are going to keep teaching that lesson whether or not Republicans ever learn it.
Yeah. Well, Steve, at the board tonight, every time he said, you know, this county voted overwhelmingly for George W. Bush, you know, it's now voting Democratic. I was just looking at it thinking, okay, well, when Senator Warnock runs again 6 years from now, how many of those counties will Steve be pointing to saying, this was red the last time Senator Warnock won? So, you know, normally when you win a Senate seat by 1 point, people think of you as vulnerable next time. Not here. The likelihood is next time, Raphael Warnock, you know, you probably will call it for him a little earlier, you know, at 9:30 instead of 10:30, something like that, and he'll win with 52, 53, something like that, that a stable reelection number year for an incumbent who's doing a good job. That's very likely for John Ossoff 4 years from now in Georgia because of that movement that Steve was identifying on that board.
Unless what Alex just said happens, which is that unless they deal with the demographic changes and the sorts of rigid appeals that the two parties have aligned themselves into, unless the Republicans decide to deal with that by restricting voting to the extent that electoral preferences among the voters don't matter. Because you can gerrymander a legislature, you cannot gerrymander a Senate seat. You can restrict voting in such a way that makes it so that the voters' preferences aren't felt. And to have the former president saying, let's terminate the Constitution and just install me as leader, right? It's shocking, and he always speaks in terms that blunt so as to shock us all and to dislocate the news cycle. But it's of a piece, right, with this idea that election results should be seen as suspect, that Republican candidates, there's, if you had to guess in the abstract, you could guess that, a lot of them wouldn't concede when they lose. The idea of problematizing elections themselves, problematizing democracy itself, is not just a Trump problem, it is increasingly a problem on the right, and it is because of these dynamics.
Brian Kemp fundamentally believes that you should restrict drop boxes, you shouldn't be able to serve people water at the polls. Brian Kemp and Donald Trump are only different by degree. He's not embarrassing. But is Brian Kemp some sort of champion of democracy? No. Brian Kemp is a champion vote suppressor. He did it when he was Secretary of State, engineered that state for himself to become governor, and then they re-engineered it again to make it as hard as possible for anyone who prefers Democrats to vote. College students had a hell of a time. Some 60,000 voters had their votes challenged in this election. They made it as hard as possible, and they still lost. They won't learn a lesson from it because Brian Kemp agrees with Donald Trump on the fundamental thing. Those people should not be allowed to vote because they don't vote for me.
And Georgia has a history of doing this.
Yes.
Right? The reason we have runoffs, to your point, it's a confection of the civil rights era, trying to thwart black candidacies. The reason you have 167 counties in Georgia is to give more power to rural voters.
Yes.
I mean, this is what the state does. So the idea that they would react to this loss, Republicans in charge, by trying to change the rules of the game, I mean, they've done it before.
They already changed. I mean, I think the other thing that Democrats will have to decide as a strategy, because they do still do that, sit around and do strategic things, is whether voting rights is the next fight, and whether sort of having the steel in the spine to abandon the filibuster and actually do something. 486 states or 48 states have contemplated 486 voter suppression laws, and a hell of a lot of them have passed.
But they're never going to get anything through a Republican-controlled House. I mean, even if it is essentially an even House, that's just not going to go anywhere. I mean, the question is whether or not they'll be able to do it at the state level, essentially, and whether or not federal judicial nominees will make a difference.
Well, could they? I mean, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed the House. How long is that thing live, right? I mean, once they have, that is, I guess, a question for our expert.
We get a new Congress.
Right, when they get a new Congress.
It expires on New Year's Eve.
Well,
everything that this Congress passes dies as soon as the Congress adjourns.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Because
while we're having this conversation about Georgia, though, you know who we ought to bring into this conversation is somebody in Georgia who is a politics reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Greg Bluestein.